Strap on some wings and prepare to jump off high ledges because boy howdy, we're looking at some Corvus Cabal.
What have I done? Why have I done?
Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you this wonderful Wednesday? I have been on a little bit of an underappreciated warband kick as of late, diving deep into the claws of Karanak, the Cypher Lords, and the subject of this video, the Corvus Cabal. These guys have been hovering around the bottom of the tier lists for a long time now, and after playing them extensively, I can see why. Now, these lads do have some glaring issues that I need to address, but I do think the negative discourse has been overblown a smidge. Just a smidge, a tipple, a idly biddly bit. So let's Raptor Strike into that thought process and get cawwing.
The beacon was activated. Who is in danger?
But before we dive into all of that, please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider joining my Patreon or my YouTube members like all of these wonderful people on screen now. You get access to some extra content, giveaways and a little bit more. But without further ado, let's get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
As is fitting for a faction that loves to swoop, glide and collide, we are going to start with the wonderfully unique reaction, Raptor Strike. Unlike nearly every other one-box warband in the game, Corvus Cabal have something no other warband has: spice.
Spice. He knows about the spice.
Raptor Strike allows any Corvus Cabal model to make a bonus move action whenever an enemy moves within 5 inches of them, both vertically and horizontally. In addition, if, and that's a big if, they end within 1 inch of an enemy, you inflict any impact damage you would have suffered from that move onto them instead. This reaction has a lot of utility outside of the potential damage. You don't need to be elevated to use it, and you don't have to get engaged like many other reactions of this ilk. Looking at you, Cypher Lords. A basic use of this would be to react to a move, then move out of line of sight or behind some sort of cover, whilst of course not moving away from the enemy. You still need to move closer by a nanometer after all. You could also use this to zip around an enemy and land on an objective safely. You could use this to land next to an enemy after their first move to slow them down on their second, or to block their route entirely. And of course, if you're jumping off a 2-inch or higher location, you might do some nice damage. At the very least, you avoid any damage to yourself, which is always a win. Despite all of this though, Raptor Strike isn't actually all that great. It's fun, it has its uses, and they are numerous if you go in and look for them. But it also has the potential to just get your guys killed. Your lads aren't that tough, and yeeting them into combat at the wrong time will see them fold like an origami swan. This is not a reaction you will necessarily use every turn. It's not a reaction you will necessarily use every game. But when that use eventually trundles into view, it can do a lot of work. Moving on to their common abilities, these are the abilities that everyone can do, and I will cover their more unique stuff when we get to that specific unit. Starting with Raven Dart, and boy howdy, I love Raven Dart. It falls into the category of underused but actually better than anything else you can do a whole bunch of the time. A lot of your guys have a minimum damage of 1 and they are also strength 3. This means that against most things you are hitting on a 5+ anyway. Raven Dart is great because you get that 1 damage on a 2+, which is a significant boost in your odds to deal that 1 damage. Onslaught simply can't compete with that level of reliability. But then you have the other part. If you roll a 5+, you deal dice damage. Let's say you have a 5 or a 6 double, something that is very common considering how easy it is to manipulate high value doubles. Well, if you roll that 5+, which remember, that's what Corvus Cabal tend to hit on normally anyway, you get the equivalent of 2 critical hits instead on the roll of that standard hit. Now, I'm no mathematician, but if I roll a standard hit and get 6 times the standard damage at a range, I call that a win. I use Raven Dart when I am scrapping in combat. I use Raven Dart when I am playing KG. I use Raven Dart to take the last wound off of wounded enemies in combat across the board. I use Raven Dart to chunk tough enemies I don't want to fight. Heck, I use Raven Dart to kill a lad in the distance whilst I double attack the guy in front of me for that sweet Sweet double dunk. Raven Dart is just great value. Onslaught has its place, but as we will soon find out, there are very few units in Corvus Cabal that really benefit from its existence, and the ones that do tend to have better things to do with their ability dice.
It's true, but he shouldn't say it.
As a general rule, I will throw a dart over Onslaught and it has worked wonders and I love it, but sadly I am less enamored with Death from Above, their faction quad. Death from Above is so darn clunky you can inexplicably hear it clattering around the nearest kitchen. I will get into the bowels of the clunk a bit later on, but for now you get a bonus move and a bonus attack. So already it is actually better than Rampage, due to it using your move characteristic and not the quad value. And if you start your move action 3 inches lower than when you started, you even get +1 strength for the attack action that was granted by this ability. That last bit is the swankily clunky bit. This quad takes effort to fully take advantage of, as in the number of games I have gotten the bonus move, the bonus attack, the bonus strength and then swung in 2 additional times has been exactly 0. Ever. That being said, it effortlessly glides over Rampage 5 out of 6 times. That free move that defies dice value on models that move 5 or 8 inches a turn, amazing. That free attack, it's great. The strength, forget about it. Had this been at any point, if you end 3 inches lower or something along those lines, we could have had Corvus Cabal laddies running up trees, backflipping off them and then landing a flurry of happy slaps on the way down like magnum donged legends. Sadly, they have to chill on a perch for a whole turn and then pray for the quad after the fact. This was so close to being cool. Bone-crushing disappointment aside, it's time to move on to the units and we start with the Shadow Piercer. The Shadow Piercer is good. That's it. Moving on. Okay. Let's look at this laddie properly. I like this chap. He has the standard Corvus movement of 5 in addition to toughness 4 and 20 wounds for 170 points, which is a perfectly respectable stat line. Throw in a 4-4-2-5 attack profile and this laddie is straight up fine. He's just kind of fine. They do come with Harrying Raven as an ability which works like a net with a lot more steps. Basically, an enemy can't disengage. This ability has no chance of failure, the ability has a 20-inch range, and the ability doesn't even need line of sight. If you need to slow something down, then just yeet your pet at him. You then throw some chaff into the harried model's face, and now they are stuck until one of you die.
It's still dead.
A key thing to note is that the enemy doesn't have to be engaged to be the target of this ability. You can pick anyone within 20 inches and for the rest of the battle round they are debuffed. This is very handy for dealing with Hunters of Hwanshi or the Wildeco Hunters as they lose their disengage on reaction, so feel free to go in and then clap their cheeks something rotten. It's cheap, it covers most of the board, and it helps the Corvus Cabal control space. It's not as universally useful as a net, but it's got plenty of applications and a bunch of positives over that at the same time. But back to the Shadow Piercer, this laddie has one extra ability to go with Harrying Raven, and that is Grizzly Trophy. This is a triple, and that's a big if, the Shadow Piercer lands a kill this activation, they can give every friendly fighter within 9 inches +1 attack. Considering the high volume of attacks the Corvus Cabal typically have, this just helps amplify their potential damage. The issue here is that the Shadow Piercer, whilst solid, is not really a model who can reliably kill things all the time, and this is of course a gamble ability at its heart. You could have just used Onslaught to get the kill, but because you risked it for the bonuses on Grizzly Trophy, you balked the kill and now you're in a bit of a pickle. Oh dear. At least you still have Raven Dart though. This ability requires careful application and usually the existence of a lot of chaff to fuel it. Overall, the Shadow Piercer is just solid. For their price, they bring support, control, and a decent stat line. Bespoke leaders often end up being attacks, and the Shadow Piercer narrowly dodges that status. very narrowly though. At least 75% of you spent the last few minutes confused as to why I was talking about some random lad with a raven and not the Corvus Cabal's leader, the Big Birdman. Sorry to inform you, but the absolutely gorgeous Big Birdman is not the leader, which should be a crime. Even Games Workshop employees think the Shrike Talon is the leader of the Corvus Cabal, and that should tell you something. Probably. All that aside, the Shrike Talon is expensive. For 210 points, you get movement 8, toughness 4, and 20 wounds. Offensively, you get 5-4-2-4, and that's a lot of really interesting stats on a model that is painfully expensive. Interesting. Ultimately, due to the high movement of the Talon, you are paying a massive tax. This lad also rocks leader stats, so he gets to crank there too. Is the Shrike Talon bad? No. The Shrike Talon is actually rather alright, sometimes within the context of the Corvus Cabal, maybe. This is because of his unique ability, Swooping Attack. This is a triple, and at its core, it's just a bonus move. No matter what, you get that portion, and being able to move 8 inches for free is always good. I mean, this lad can move a total of 24 inches a turn, which is most of the board. Everything else aside, this gives him a lot of scope to mess with objectives and get where he needs to be. But that's not all. If you started your move action 3 inches higher than when you ended it, similar to Death from Above, you get a bonus attack action in addition. This is so close to being good, but it takes a whole turn to set up for maximum payoff. If you do get to do this, you are looking at an 8-inch free move, followed by 15 attacks on whatever you want dead. And yeah, you can use this in smart ways to move 18 and then still double attack, which is lovely, but it's so clunky and so close to being good. Like with Death from Above, if they had allowed you just to climb 3 inches and then jump off, this ability would have felt amazing to use. As it stands, it's good, but it could have been so much better with some QOL, some TLC, some BBC. At the very least though, you'll be using this for the free move almost every single turn, so what are you approaching with your Shrike Talon? He's kind of expensive, he's kind of soft, and his damage output is kind of fine, but it is absolutely quantity over quality. You send your 210 point laddie into 40 point skeletons, you send him into 55 point shatterers, you send him into 65 point elf profiles, you hunt down skinks. This guy mulches these targets and he can kill a fair few before he eventually goes down. And that is good. Corvus Cabal, as we will soon see, are pretty darn cost effective going forward. You want to start with, maintain, and then grow your activation advantage, and that is what the Shrike Talon does. And of course, you can also go after support pieces and dangerous squishy threats. You know, things like Quiet Pock, Arbalistas, Flame Hurlers, even Godspeakers, whatever you need killing that is around about 12 wounds and dangerous. This guy is a scalpel, and because of his outlandish speed, he's very hard to stop. But what if I told you that I often bless this guy and I do not hold back on the cost? My go-to blessings are either +1 strength for plus 15 points or +1 damage for plus 25 points. And let me tell you, 10-3-3-4 is a really fun profile that shreds so many things. If you get that legendary 15-4-3-4 off with a swoop or a Death from Above, you do work. Look, you are already paying through the teeth for this guy, so what's 25 points more? Just spend the cost and have a great time. Enough gushing about pretty darn average units that I like way more than I probably should. It's time to big up the Stalker. This guy is 130 points, has toughness 4, 15 wounds and movement 5, and comes with a wonderful 4-4-2-4 profile. I really like Stalkers, but it pains me that I don't use them very often. Toughness 4 and 15 wounds is a great defensive line, and the offensive line is equally as solid. They are fast, durable, and dangerous. Their unique ability, Swift Climb, even lets them ignore vertical distance when moving, which makes them even faster and very useful in objective games. These guys are bulky mid-range in a warband you wouldn't expect to find mid-range as bulky as this. Their cost might initially put you off, but when you break down their stats, they are about on point for how much you would pay for what you get. They aren't overpriced, they are just mid-ranged in a game that tends to favour chaff or elite. Such is the way of competitive Warcry. And speaking of chaff, the real reasons these guys don't see play often is because of their in-faction competition, the Cabalist. For 65 points, you can take a cheap as chips chaff unit. Movement 5, toughness 3 and 8 wounds is your standard elf line, and a 4-3-1-3 is a pretty solid offensive line for a model at this price range. Cabalists are, in my opinion, kind of great. Sure, when you compare them to 40 or 50 point underpriced movement 3 nonsense that plagues Warcry right now, they are obviously going to look bad. But in the grander scope of Warcry, having chaff at this points level is cheap enough to do all kinds of funky things with your lists. I mean, recent ghouls are 60 points nowadays and Cabalists have +1 attack on that lad. It's not great, but it's not nothing. These guys want to avoid combat when they can, run around, grab objectives, throw darts, and generally be a pain in the arse. They are made of paper, but they add numbers, and that's what you need. You can take 2 Cabalists for the price of 1 Spire Stalker, and whilst you lose a lot of stats in that exchange, you gain more models, which is very valuable. A bunch of Cabalists sitting in a tree, having a little smoochy smoochy, swooping down and then unloading a bunch of impact hits and then damage onto one guy is a surefire way to get damage through eventually. Weight of numbers adds up, and with 4 attacks a pop, you will get things done when you need to, when you are desperate. There are 2 more Cabalists in Corvus Cabal to consider as well. The Cabalist with Familiar is 5 points more, has the exact same stats, and just comes with the Harrying Raven ability. I often take one of these because I have the points left over to take one. Another source of Raven lets me control more of the board and lets my Shadow Piercer do other things. Finally, we have the Cabalist with Spear, who is a whopping 80 points. That being said, for 80 points you are getting a 4-3-1-4 profile at range 2. Most spears have less attacks than their non-speared variant, but Corvus pay that premium to maintain their high volume of attacks, high crit and high range. Again, I don't take these guys as standard, but if I've got points left over, I am happy to upgrade basic Cabalists to a spear lad. Plus, due to the range, they tend to live longer, so you get more return on your investment. Your hefty investment. In an ideal world, Warcry will eventually get an update that sorts out the issue of Movement 3 chaff being ludicrously cheap, and when that happens, Cabalists will look even better. Give it time, you heard it here first.
You're a liar!
So that's the Corvus done, and it's time to look at allies, and Chaos allies are painfully boring because it boils down to take a Fomoroid because he's big, smashy and acts like an anchor for your warband. Or take a Varangard because he's big and he's smashy and acts like a very fast anchor for your warband. And some people might even get creative and tell you to bring a Myrmidon because he's big, smashy and acts as an anchor for your warband, but with range 2. And all of these suggestions are great. It's not flashy, but it's damn effective at elevating a warband. Your advantage is incredibly powerful allies. You are playing Chaos, damn it.
I am shocked. Shocked. Well, not that shocked.
Now, there are other options that you can consider, and I am very partial to a Trueblood. This guy is cheapish and he comes with solid stats, and more importantly has access to the best net in the whole game. Why is his net the best? Because it never misses. You can do this every turn until the game ends. This is amazing for controlling objectives, shutting down dragons, shutting down titans, and generally just being a little bit of a rascal. What's interesting is that people really hate the Trueblood. He acts as a distraction because once you've netted their big 200, 300 point centerpiece model, they are gunning for that guy for the rest of the game. It is all value. Not only did you net something that far exceeds your cost, but you also pulled 1, 2 or even more models your way for a turn or two. Huge value plays come naturally to the Trueblood, and if you give him +1 movement, he gets even better. Finally, because he's cheap, you aren't even sacrificing your model count all that much to bring him. If you want more control, the Trueblood is the way to go. If you want an anchor, you go big. And if you want both, I kid you not, you can very easily have both. So before I sign off, let's look at some example lists, and my current go-to for a more pure Corvus list is a Shadow Piercer, a Strike Talon with +1 damage, 2 Cabalists with Spear, 1 Cabalist with Familiar, 3 basic Cabalists, and a Trueblood. This list has 9 models, it's very fast, it has ways to grind through chaff, it can shut down Titans, and since you have multiple Harrying Ravens, you can even delay multiple Titans if you have to. Play the objective wherever possible and just outmaneuver slower things. Your biggest weakness here is definitely threat projection. Factions that can catch you are a big deal, and factions with a heavy ranged presence are devastating. From the top rope is the next list, and that is a Shadow Piercer, 6 Cabalists, Drom, the Wounder of Worlds, and the Gohulk. This list is more aggressive, it has 2 anchors, you have a pull, you have more ranged presence, and you have way more melee presence too. The Gohulk replacing the Strike Talon does lose a lot of mobility, but it replaces it with raw stats. We're talking +1 damage, +2 strength, +16 wounds, and +1 toughness. This guy is a brick, and we still land the 9-man model count. What I really love about the Gohulk is this guy's double overhead smash. It feels a lot like swooping attack should, and it can do a lot of damage if you can pull it off, and pulling it off is difficult because rules as written, you can never use this ability due to how falling and jumping interact. I'll be going into a video on the Gohulk and his buddies soon, where I will go into detail as to why this ability is potentially amazing, but sadly arguably unusable. But for now, talk to your opponent before the game and talk to your TO prior to an event to see if overhead smash is going to be allowed. And if you can use it, overhead smash is a double that lets you jump off the top rope and deal a potential 18 damage to whatever it is you land on. It is so much fun to use whenever you get the chance to use it. Even without overhead smash though, the Gohulk and Drom bring a lot to the table, mostly raw damage, toughness, and wounds. Finally, we have the real Titan show. The best way I have found to use the Corvus is sadly to abandon all their tricks and just take this. You have a Trueblood and you have a Fomoroid Crusher. This is very similar to the Gohulk build, only less interesting, and it's actually functional. Important to note, you do not have the points to give the Crusher +1 attack, and if you want to do that, you are going to have to downgrade that Trueblood to a Spire Stalker or to 2 more Cabalists, or dropping a Cabalist and having 75 points worth of blessings, which is a little much. Basically, this list has some fiddler potential to get it singing for you. In this form though, you have 9 speedy models, a pseudo net, a perfect net, and a big ass Titan. It's super basic, but it does work.
Groovy.
Overall, the Corvus Cabal are nowhere near as bad as people would make out. However, they do have some key problems that really hold them back. Namely, their gimmick is just weak in its current iteration. Being up high and then swooping down is a cool concept executed like arse. That being said, they do have a lot of speed and you can absolutely do work with a list revolving around mostly Corvus, but utilising the Strike Talon in interesting ways. They also fall into the common chaos trap of losing their identity to gain more power, which is thematic in a way, I guess. If you want to go all in on Corvus for competitive play, you basically cut out all their tricks and take great allies instead. Corvus are probably the best nimble warband Chaos has to achieve this, as their chaff and leader are cheap enough and actually good. This makes them a great base if speed is what you are after over durability. Ultimately, what they need is a quality of life update. They need to remove the clunk from their triple and their quad, and really they could do with reducing the vertical requirement to 2 inches. Not all boards are going to have 3 inches of terrain, where nearly every board has an abundance of 2-inch terrain. These two things combined would help the Corvus engage with their gimmick, encourage players to use their abilities, and hopefully reduce their reliance on generic allies. James Workshop, if you're listening, give me a call. Oh, and of course, if a bunch of Movement 3 factions got a price bump, then Corvus would get an indirect buff, as their units wouldn't look so inefficient by comparison. Will any of this happen? Probably not, but a man can dream. As it stands, Corvus are just okay, and if I believed in tier lists, I would keep them out of the oof tier and plonk them right into the tier. But that's the end of this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing. As always, huge shout out to my patrons and members who help support the channel, and a massive shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers: Armor Enthusiast 7, Brioche, CT6497, Girth Demon, Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Tough, Tootin' Baby and Velas. Until next time, lads, ladies and everyone in between and beyond, ta-ra.